Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's artist talk at the Glucksman with Brian Duggan. This is a series of online talks accompanying the Glucksman's 2021 exhibition, Home, Being and Belonging in Contemporary Ireland, and invites participating artists from that show to discuss their practices. My name is Chris Clark. I'm a senior curator here at the Glucksman, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's presentation and discussion with artist Brian Duggan. Brian's work investigates the physical limitations of the immediate environment on the individual, ideas of control and where we stand, how we are tied and what binds us, are continuous references within his artistic practice. And he examines the prevailing conditions of when things go wrong and sites of stress and breakage. Brian Duggan's previous exhibitions include solo projects in Balzer Projects Basel, Visual in Carlow, the U Lane Gallery in Dublin, Crawford Art Gallery Cork, Temple Bar Gallery Dublin, Limerick City Gallery of Art, and ISCP New York City. His work is included in the permanent collections of the U Lane Gallery, the OPW National Collection, and the Irish Museum of Modern Art. And he's undertaken residencies in ISCP New York, Irish Museum of Modern Art, CCI Paris, Braziers International, Project 304 Bangkok and Chiang Mai in Thailand. And he was a co-founder and co-director of Palace Projects in Dublin from 1996 to 2009. If you're unfamiliar with the format for this series, we will be streaming a pre-recorded presentation by Brian in about a minute. That's just over half an hour long. And then we'll be linking up live with Brian for a chance to have a bit of a discussion, and you can pose your kind of questions to him as well. You can use the chat function on Zoom to pose any questions, and I'll make sure he gets them. And just as a reminder, we will be putting this this discussion up on YouTube following the conversation, so just keep that in mind as well. But without further ado, welcome to the talk, and happy to hand over to a presentation by Brian Duggan. Thank you.
How you doing? This is Brian, and thanks for joining me, and thanks also to Fiona and Chris for inviting me to give this online talk. I will start with some of the work that I'm showing in the Glucksman at the moment for the home exhibition, and then go to some recent work and some work in progress. So this is a poem, part of a poem by Thomas McCarthy. As I was saying before the news became really bad, as I was saying, we hardly knew what it is to breathe. Whether it is being distracted or being in a constant state of fear, we forget the immense gratitude that our lungs still function, or maybe by breath, I mean something more than air. So the title of my project is Breath, I mean something more than air. And what we are looking at here is a air filter, which is part of the radiation monitoring system that is put in place throughout Europe and Ireland to monitor the radioactive material in the atmosphere. So the Chernobyl, just some history on this, the Chernobyl disaster was a freak nuclear accident that occurred on the 26th of April 1986 at the Chernobyl nuclear power station in the Ukraine. An explosion followed by a fire released huge amounts of radioactive material and particles into the atmosphere, which then spread across the Union of the Soviet Republic and across Europe. Since this time, Europe has put in place a live network of environmental testing sites that test for any increases in radiation as a first warning system. Ireland has a network of permanent radiation monitoring stations distributed across the country. These monitoring stations filter the air to test the particles and elements within the atmosphere every day of every year. The monitoring stations continuously measure gamma radiation, and if elevated radiations are detected, an alarm system is triggered. These air filters are a record of the air we breathe, the environment we live in, a visualization of the very fabric of the cellular nature of our existence on the planet. While they specifically record our home in Ireland, they also open out the difference between the locations. The air you can see in the filters is more clogged and dirty in cities than the air, say, the filters in Valencia or even Cork Airport. However, they are a physical pathway to our interconnectedness, to the EU and global networks. Even though we are an isolated island at the western edge of Europe, we are all interconnected by factors seen and unseen. This project is a sample of a moment in time from our home. So the filters are almost like charcoal drawings that represent in reality the air that we breathe at home. The black is dark deep and almost sparkles with the trace elements of oil and other pollutants, and the filters themselves in contrast are light and fragile like tissue paper or like our lungs. So this is a close-up on one of the filters. They are about 50 millimeters wide diameter, and you can see a little fly, actually, bug, got brought into the filters, just on the lower left. So this is how they will be presented in the gallery. Well, we're still discussing how they'll be presented in the gallery, and it is quite an interesting time because the project was proposed before the pandemic, and now we are all hyper aware of the environment we're in, the air that we breathe. So it became quite pertinent in an unexpected fashion. This is some of the maps of the plume that carried around Europe after Chernobyl. And while Ireland got relatively a little radiation in terms of what it may have had or what other countries had, we still did get some, and there was places that had to be sealed off, and there was livestock and farmland that had to be isolated. So this is an example of some of the filters. The one on the right hand side is a low volume air filter, and that is in Dublin at the EPA headquarters. The one on the left, that isn't in Ireland, that's just a stock image, but the large air filter, which is on the roof of UCD, is called Snow White. I'll come to that now in a moment. So this is the EU. The reason these filters I find fascinating is because Ireland is connected to the European Radiological Data Exchange Platform. So that is EURDEP, and it's a network for the exchange of monitoring data between participating countries in real time. So what we are looking at here is the UCD Science Building in Dublin, and on the roof is the Snow White high volume air filter, which has a capacity for 150,000 litres per minute of air is brought through it. And this really is an amazing network, I find, of science looking out at the different elements of our environment pre-pandemic. And this building here you're looking at is the physics building, which I did a residency a couple of years ago with the UCD School of Science and Parity Studios, which is a really fascinating residency where they bring artists into the different departments and allow them to work away, and they have a great studio support program. So it's worth checking that out. That's Parity Studios in UCD. So this is a piece of work I'm working on at the moment, and we will watch just a few seconds of it. So this building is if anyone knows it, this is the headquarters of Met Éireann in Dublin, and on the roof of it there is an air filter. And this was the first location that noticed in Ireland an increase in the radiation after Chernobyl in 1986. And it's a cosmoform building, which is type of building that is shaped to look at the sky, designed by Lee McCormick in 1979. And the audio is from the HBO series Chernobyl in the background. So here we have 2 posters for the Carnsore Point nuclear protest concerts and festivals. This is a body of work I've been working on for a couple of years, and on the right you see the second poster. It was in 78 and 79 were the festivals, and these festivals were amazing to me because of the energy they brought to social change. In the 1970s there was a discussion in Ireland with the oil crisis that we needed to become more energy independent. One of the solutions they came to land on was that we should build a nuclear power station, and they settled on Carnsore Point in Wexford. And needless to say, people decided that this may not be a great idea for Ireland, and a lot of people had questions about it. So judging from a point now and looking back, I have a feeling they tried to rush it through too quickly, and then they were on the back foot explaining. And there was certainly problems with having nuclear power in Ireland in the 70s. Whether or not even we had the facilities or the expertise to manage something like that is still open to question. So in the late 70s, a group of people started to come together, and it was very much a word of mouth and grassroots project to protest against this. The first festival was a free festival. It was about 5,000 people. The second festival was about 25,000 people. And eventually the national media started having to take notice. A number of things then happened also in the world of the nuclear industry's public perception. The 3 Mile Island accident happened in Pennsylvania in America, and within a month the China Syndrome film was also released. And so the nuclear debate suddenly shifted from being free, clean energy to highly questionable, toxic, dangerous material that was quite problematic in all stages of its development. So the protests began, as I said, quite small, and then got larger, and they were very successful, and even started the green movement in Ireland. So if you can imagine trying to set up a festival in the 70s, there's no internet, most people don't have phones, people would be doing flyers, handing out leaflets, stickers. So there was real credit that they managed to pull it off. The picture on the left is that there was a third Carnsore Point Festival in the 80s, and I think there was one a number of years ago as well, sort of celebrating what had happened, but also trying to bring it forward into the green movement. But it became quite fractured, while the original ones were quite simple and on message, and I suppose a lot of them were building information. So here's a picture of the campsite from the RTE News, and I'll show you an installation I did with Balzer Projects in Basel. This is in 2018, 2019.
Waste products, as Mr. Nolan has said, are removed and processed. The waste after that is at the moment on a small scale being converted into a vitrified form, that is glassy material, which can then be stored in stable rock formations.
Would that be in Ireland?
That could be in Ireland.
And if it's not in Ireland, where?
At the moment, the anti-nuclear, the extreme members of the anti-nuclear movement are preventing an examination, even an examination of the more suitable sites.
Is there more of a guarantee about the supply of nuclear raw materials to Ireland than other forms of energy?
It's impossible to guarantee your supply of any material which has to come in from outside the country. However, there are more sources of uranium available in the world than there are of either coal or of oil. There are adequate stocks of uranium at the moment for some 60 to 70 years, and if you go down to lower grades, of which there are plenty, you can extend that by some hundreds of years.
What effect will such a plant have on the ecology?
As regards to radiation, I do not believe that there will be any detectable effect on the ecology. There will, however, be an outflow of warm water from the cooling of the plant, and this may have some temperature effect on the ecology. I would say that most other power plants, non-nuclear, will have a similar effect.
That is the installation in the gallery, and you can hear a bad audio of Christy Moore singing the Ballad of Nuclear Power, who was a pivotal figure at the time, and one of the many folk artists who lent their support and energy to really changing things. The exhibition contained vintage tents which I sourced on eBay from the 1970s, which I didn't realize now you have to pay a premium for because everyone has dome tents, but if you want the old heavy canvas ones. So here's some of the original footage from the time from RTE, and I'd say it's pretty amazing looking at it from our perspective that they managed to actually be so effective. And I'm sure they were soaked in a field down in Carnsore Point, but yet they managed to pull it off. So this is some work I'm working on at the moment. These are sculptures that I have created. So I've redesigned the original sketch for the power station in Carnsore Point, and then I'm remaking this work as sculpture using slate and ceramic and marble. So the reason I really enjoy working with stone is because it has a solidity which is quite interesting when you're dealing with matters of unstable material such as nuclear material, which is always breaking down. So the storage facilities for nuclear materials are really problematic, and the main way that they process the nuclear fuel and the spent nuclear material is by reprocessing it and eventually burying it in storage in rocks and in mountains or in under the earth. So there is this chain of thought that eventually breaks down to sometime in the future someone else will know what to do with this, but at the moment all we can do is keep it safe, and the safest place is in the ground. So this is sorry, a picture of the work flat, head on, and then just at an angle, so you can see. So they're 3D but 2D works. These are inserts of porcelain into slate. The work is 300 by 310 mil deep. This is another work that I started a number of years ago, and it is the Fukushima nuclear power station before the wave hit. So it is a infographic of a particular moment in time when everything was working. So it's a lovely image to me of how the simplicity of an idea or an argument for a particular type of processes, but then is undermined by reality very soon after. So I worked for many years now, for over 10 years now, with the technician Robbie Stones in Dublin on numerous projects, and so it's great having a technician to work with who understands and really tries to push the material forward. So what you're looking at here is I think it's 140 by 110 solid piece of marble inlaid with Kilkenny limestone, glass, porcelain, ceramic, and also metal. And so each of these pieces are cut out and inlaid into a flat piece of stone. This is how it looks on a gallery wall. This is in Limerick City Gallery at a solo show I did there a couple of years ago with Helen Carey, and you can see how the angles shift. So when you're looking at it one way, everything seems fine. You look at it another way, it has altered. So this is a new work. Well, it's a year or two old, but hopefully it'll be coming out and be released this year with Farpoint recordings. I worked with a composer, David Bremner, and I created a film, and I worked with him to create a new piece of work, and we will have a look at it now. So it's just silent at the start, but the music will start in a moment. The work was performed at the Ad Astra recital in the Sculpture Hall in the Hugh Lane Gallery, which is wonderful to be able to do that in 2018. So the work you were looking at is a mix from the live concert and also the film, where I went through hours of footage of publicly available advertisements and technical research videos where the robots and the robot companies, a lot of them coming from the car industry actually, are using their technology to help clean up Sellafield. So this is all original footage from the different tanks and the different storage spaces that are too dangerous for people to go in. And that was a really great project to be able to work on with Kieran Crilly as well, and Dylan and Chloe and David Bremner. So hopefully it'll be coming out later this year as well. So this is, here we have another project that I've been working on for a couple of years, mapping the nuclear testing sites, which began in the 40s, which resulted in the whole world being covered with a layer of radioactive particles that are still to be found to this day in different numbers in different locations, but it covered the globe with the amount of material that was blasted into the atmosphere. So this is the very first nuclear testing site in Trinity in Nevada. It's the American testing site. And I wanted a way to try and understand the scale of what had been done and what was going on in the world. And so I decided to start mapping all the different testing sites. So chronologically, I've been using different technologies to map the different sites. And I've gone through some of the American ones, some of the Russian ones, and I'll get to France and the UK in time, and India and so on. And it's really a way of understanding the scale of it, because it's still quite amazing that there was 2,056 nuclear testing tests were done. But since I started the project, North Korea also has been testing different materials, and I'm not sure if officially now that number has gone up. And this is an installation in the Balzer projects in Basel in Switzerland, and I also showed these in UCD, and I showed them in the lab gallery with Sheena Barrett as well. Thinking back about where all this work came from, and I think a lot of it is to do with growing up in the 70s and 80s, when the nuclear question was very much at the forefront of people's consciousness and the public debate. And this is a book that I also found very affecting. It was When the Wind Blows by Raymond Briggs. It was released in 1982, and it recounts a elderly, upstanding members of the community who take on board the government advice and try and survive a nuclear shelter. Now, Raymond Briggs would be well known for doing The Snowman, but this is a very, very powerful piece of work. And so they build the nuclear shelter at home by putting up the mattresses, and they conserve the water, but then the pamphlet doesn't tell them to put lids on the water. So they end up at the end drinking water that's contaminated. But these type of questions weren't so far-fetched at the time. You know, you had Reagan and Thatcher, and there was very much even thinking back to Frankie Goes to Hollywood, there was very much something in the air that this actually isn't so far away. So that informed my sort of thinking in the background, my subconscious growing up, and later on as an artist, when you develop different subject matters and different elements in the world, become clearer and become more worthy of a focus. So this is one of the challenges to survival booklets, where you build your own door and put mattresses up against it. Now, it actually looks like great fun, and I think maybe also that was it when I was younger. I would have loved to have done that in our house. So here we have another project that I've been doing for a number of years, called Not in Itself a Hazard. So Fiestaware is a company in Pennsylvania which is still going, and in the 1930s they make crockery and houseware. In the 1930s they used uranium in their glazes, and so this obviously now we know was problematic, but at the time they didn't realize, and it was stopped not on public health advice, but because the Americans needed all the uranium they could get for the bomb. So I've been doing an installation where in a number of different sites, and it changes depending on the gallery, where I have these original vintage plates, and I have a working Geiger counter, and it is testing the radioactive material within the plates. So it sort of works as an audio installation as well as a physical installation, and it's quite fascinating to me that you have an innocuous everyday item that is also highly dangerous. Well, the American EPA say it is not in itself a hazard if you don't scratch the plate, but it still is uranium, and some people in America still eat off them and are very, proud that they have their sandwiches on them, and then some people realize that that's not the greatest idea. And I showed this in Rotterdam, and a family had asked me how long the show was because they use Fiestaware in their house in Amsterdam, and they wanted to go and get the plates and bring them down to be tested, but unfortunately the show would have been over by then. So a number of years ago in I suppose it must have been 2010, but then the show was in 2011. Dublin Contemporary came to me and wanted to work with me, and at the time I'd done a show in the Hugh Lane working with fairgrounds and the Wall of Death, and I came across this image which fascinated me, and it is of a rusted Ferris wheel. And so looking around and researching it, it was a Ferris wheel in Pripyat in the Ukraine, and Pripyat was a city built to house the workers of Chernobyl. And this Ferris wheel still stands, and a amusement park was built for the city of Pripyat for the people, and it was due to open on May Day weekend. And on the 29th of April in 1986, which is nearly 35 years ago, April this year, the nuclear accident happened in Chernobyl, and 50,000 people were evacuated from the city. So the Ferris wheel was never used, and it still stands to this day. Now the city for many years has been forgotten, but over the past number of years, there has been an increase in disaster tourism type of guides coming in from the Ukraine. You can get in a bus and go travel around it with a Geiger counter and see the city and the different elements. But I wouldn't do it because I think it's highly dangerous, and you turn a corner and there's a pocket of radiation that's very high, and it's not a wise thing to be doing. And while people are, definitely nature has come back, and there are some programs showing sort of gangs of wild dogs or different flora and fauna have grown back in abundance because the main predators were humans, and if humans aren't there then they can thrive, but there still is a lot of sickness in them. The life expectancy is quite problematic, and the food and the water is still in places very toxic. So I was in touch with people who actually lived in Pripyat, and I explained to them a project I wanted to do, and I was saying about Dublin Contemporary, and they sent me some original photos from the time, and then looked on the web, and then worked with model makers, and we recreated a scale model of this as a sculpture, and it was shown in Dublin Contemporary in 2011, which was a great show actually. And last year I was delighted that the Arts Council took it into their collection, so I'm delighted that it has a significant home as well. So it's about 6 feet tall, and it's an exact replica, and so all those little pods that people go in are handmade, and the ticket booth with the cracked window and so on. So it's a mix of materials, but the main wheel is in metal. So just coming to the end, I wanted to come back to something that just cropped up in the news in the past few days. So this is a Fukushima water bottle. It's a multiple that I made. The title is "We are still consulting with various stakeholders before finally deciding on the solution." It's a Fukushima water bottle. It's an unlimited series with an image from a composite image from the storage tanks. So when Fukushima happened, it was obviously a very dangerous and volatile situation that kept changing, and so they pumped seawater into one of the reactors, and that, while it did actually work, it creates a huge problem with what you do with the storage. So as the water heats up, they have to change the water, and they have to keep adding water. So they need to store the water that comes out of the the reactor. Over time, this builds up, and then also where Fukushima is built on a lower level down a mountain, groundwater seeps into the site as well. This also has to be stored and treated, and so the amount of water that they're storing is insane, and it keeps getting the growth of the storage is continually growing, as you can imagine. So I was trying to understand the scale of what it is they're dealing with, and so I made this water bottle, which is handheld size normally, and basically the amount of water they're storing is 257,600 bottles each day. That is going through the plant that has to be stored, and as a result they're running out of space. And this week they announced that in 2 years' time they're going to have to start releasing some of this water back into the ocean. And they released a small video to help people understand what is happening, which I think has been pulled. The Guardian had it, and I just thought I'd put it here.
2年後をめどにトリチウムを含む処理水の海洋放出が決まったことを受けて、復興庁が昨日公開しました。
So what they hope to do is filter the water, take out most of the radiation they can, but there is tritium in the water, which is, they say at the levels it wouldn't be problematic for humans or for animals, but there's a huge outcry, obviously.
新たな風評に結びつく恐れが懸念されているシビアな問題を紹介することについて、県民は全然信じられないね。本当に。キャラクターを使い分かりやすく作ったとしていて、引き続き YouTube などで公開を続ける方針です。
Lovely image of the isotope there inside somebody. So that is my presentation. I'll finish on this little Mr. Tritium, and I just wanted to say thank you to Fiona and to Chris for inviting me to be part of the project. We got selected, and the project was due to happen before the pandemic, so it's quite interesting how the idea of home has altered over time, and the lockdowns and the easing and the lockdowns again. But it's lovely to have such an interesting project on the horizon that will happen, and hopefully everyone will be able to see it. And okay, so we'll finish there, and thanks.
And thank you so much for the presentation. I thought it was really wonderful and a real deep dive into your practice, which yeah, it's kind of fascinating. I have a number of questions here myself. I just want to extend an invitation again to anyone watching, that if you have any questions, post them in the chat function or the Q&A, and I'll get them to Brian as well. But first, I'm going to monopolize you a little bit here, just with a few things. And I thought you spoke very eloquently about the environmental issues that you explore in your work. And I wonder if, do you see your practice as a form of activism?
I suppose it has an activist element, but no, I'm really following my nose into the work, but in terms of setting up a festival and in terms of doing a protest movement, no. So in some ways it's sort of it's paying attention to some projects then, like the filters, maybe nobody is aware of, but I'd be in support of that. So I'm not against those sort of systems. So it's aware of activism. Some of the time it's inspired by activism, and yeah, so it's a mix, but it wouldn't be I think to be more, if I wanted to focus as an activist practice, there's more that I could do in some situations, maybe, it's a very dedicated job to be an activist.
I mean, I guess there's a communicative element to the works as well. And I guess also, I mean, sometimes kind of looking at them, you kind of feel a sense of kind of upset and anger there. But, I think the way you kind of communicate that, it feels very kind of level-headed in a way that you're kind of putting the information out there, I think. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the idea of energy independence that you touched on, and this kind of notion of that energy independence is a sign of like national maturity or self-reliance, and you alluded to this in talking about Ireland and its kind of drive to establish a nuclear power plant. And yet the ramifications of kind of nuclear power are transnational. So we see this obviously in Fukushima, you see this in Chernobyl, kind of drifting across Europe and stuff. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about, how we can affect a kind of a change in this kind of national policy or kind of ideas around kind of nationhood to kind of go away from this sense of like, you need to be independent. I'm also thinking here of something like, the fracking drive in America, where it's kind of, a lot of people obviously see this as a way of kind of disentangling themselves from kind of, foreign policy in the Middle East.
Well, it's interesting, and the oil crisis anyway in the 70s, very much Ireland was very isolated. We're a small country, and so we were continually challenged by the markets and the price of oil, and our nearest neighbor controlled really a lot of the energy that was coming in. So the arguments at the time in the 70s were, we need more energy for jobs, we need to have IDA data, well, not even data parks, we need to have factories, and where are we going to get the power, and we can't rely on the UK the whole time. Now that obviously shifted over time, and the nuclear thing changed, but it came up recently both in the green area but also with Brexit. So we get a lot of our gas through the UK and so on. So with Brexit, it was never really mentioned. We've huge interconnectors of gas coming into, and how is that going to happen? And if suddenly everyone is having a border, well, we still need a hole for the gas to come through. But they are planning, and I think it's happening. There's going to be an interconnector to France, which is a huge undertaking, but to try and to branch out our platform. And the green movement is definitely changing how we understand and how we take care of the environment. The oil industry has huge subsidies, and so anytime the wind farms or anytime that sort of technology is mooted, people say it's uncompetitive and it won't be sustainable. But like the oil industry gets a huge amount of public money around the world to be sustainable. So it'll happen for a number of different ways, and in some ways we may be very sufficient if we have enough imagination and enough development going forward. We'll see if it's enough for everybody though, with the way things move. But the fracking is, it's pretty, I know we're not taking fracked gas and so on. So that is still a live political issue, really.
I have a question here. Thanks very much for that. I have a question here from Evie McCarthy from Sample Studios, who says, thanks for the talk. And she had the pleasure of working alongside your contributions to Dublin Contemporary and in Limerick City Gallery during your exhibition there. And could you tell us a bit more about your process of identifying and working with archival material? And for example, the RT footage for the Get to the Point work and exhibition.
Yeah, well, it's just really research and reading and following your nose, and sometimes people can say something to me in a sort of an informal setting in a gallery that something reminds them of something else. Sometimes it's just reading and following your nose. So I don't sit down and go, it has to be this way, this way, this way, but it's really, I suppose the way to describe it is, following your nose and just looking up the internet and reading and listening to music and then listening to what other people say. And like the Carnsore Point project was, I was too young at the time when it first happened, but then I was talking to my mum, and my parents were going to go to that, but my mum was pregnant with my younger sister. And so it's all sort of lived history as well of sort of personal elements, but then other wider elements that just, the news, the Guardian, what's happening on the radio, and different things just take hold.
I mean, as an extension of that question, Brenda Moore McCann was asking, how important is collaboration in your practice? So who are you working with, I guess, sometimes in kind of unpacking?
Yeah, it's, I think collaboration is great. Yeah, the more you can collaborate, the better. And that goes for curators but other artists and other scientists. Like the residency I did in UCD School of Science was a really interesting model where they brought you in and you could go to the coffee room with the scientists and just hear the sort of social interactions and people talking about gravitational waves and just real. I find working with scientists really interesting because they also love to talk about their work and you know what they find fascinating, and if they find you are interested as well, they become very energized. So it's nice to work with people who want to work like that. And then the piece I did with the piano with David Bremner, we did an open call, and myself and Kieran Crilly worked through a number of different composers and really stunning artists, and worked then with David, who I hadn't met before, and subsequently discovered his parents lived in Cumbria and his dad worked connected to all this. So it was just a nice sort of natural fit of, and it sort of evolved, and he'd be composing the work and then I'd be showing them the videos. And then larger works, you know, I think really if you have good curators and good technicians with you, it makes the project better and makes it more it sort of embiggens the work, you know. So I think collaboration is necessary, and wherever possible I jump at the chance. So
well, I mean, I certainly second your thoughts on good technicians. Always good to get a shout out for those guys.
yeah.
I have a question here about the idea of kind of invisibility and its kind of prevalence in your practice, and maybe not even just invisibility, but sometimes it's kind of quite subtle kind of cue of what's happening around people. And I'm thinking of the way you use the Geiger counters or the kind of the air filters, which have this kind of functional usage, but also kind of, you know, slowly kind of start pulling in and absorbing all this kind of dirt and dust in the air, or you know, the presence of uranium in everyday kind of dishware. And I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on this idea of kind of the invisible, but also the invisible danger in your work, and how you can kind of negotiate this tension between kind of, you know, being a visual artist representing these things, but also kind of communicating the sense of kind of underlying, unseen, even kind of structural networks that kind of surround us.
Yeah, I don't know what the answer is to that really. As you're talking there, it does link up. A lot of my work would be uncovering for myself and really trying to find and understand the different processes, and I suppose like with the water bottle, that's really trying to understand the scale of what it is. So you hear figures and you hear numbers, and it's really, how does one understand that, both in the scale of the world or what's happening, you know, Chernobyl or something like that, but how does that really connect with you as a human, or the people, your family, or your friends or colleagues. And so it's a byproduct of trying to investigate that missing part of the puzzle, maybe.
But I thought, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned the water bottle there, because I thought it was quite wonderful. I mean, as a project, but also the way you talked about the and I can't remember the name of the cartoon character, but even just the usage of these kind of cartoon figures to communicate something that's dangerous or something that's kind of deadly, and it feels to me like there was kind of an affinity there between what they're doing, but also in a way kind of what someone like Raymond Briggs is doing, is trying to make it kind of realizable, things that maybe kind of are too vast or too terrifying to kind of think about, and to put it into some kind of human level. I thought there was kind of interesting correspondence there with your own practice.
Yeah, well, it's like I say, I think it's been pulled because they felt it was a huge mistake. But it was interesting for me to see, just as we were preparing for this, and I suppose they would see, I don't speak for them, but maybe the animators would see that they've got information and they're trying to bring information out, whereas if it was just numbers, it gets lost, you know. But it still is slightly unfathomable, the scale of what they're trying to do, and then also the follow on, how that's going to get solved. I don't understand that, you know.
This is kind of maybe a bit of a strange question, but you mentioned the disaster tourism in your talk. And is this an issue that you kind of have to confront in making artworks and exhibitions that also ask individuals to experience and consider kind of environmental damage or kind of danger, or kind of, you know, this kind of terrifying sides of life, you know?
Sorry, explain the question again.
Just think about this idea of disaster tourism and how
Yeah.
people kind of seek out these experiences of kind of confronting environmental damage or kind of trauma in some kind of way. And is that something that you think about in terms of, as an artist, in terms of making work that on some level puts viewers in a similar position where they're looking at kind of uranium dishware, or they're thinking about the kind of contamination of the atmosphere in a way. And I just wonder about that kind of correlation. Is that something that that is on your mind? That I'm not saying that going to see an exhibition of your work should be considered a form of disaster tourism, but there is also this kind of element of kind of confrontation there.
Yeah. Well, I think it's I am quite interested in how the work is presented and the viewer and how they move around the space. So I'll be very aware of, what is happening at the work and the people in the space. So the uranium plates were actually, well, maybe no, there'll be other things I've done with roller skating in Visual in Carlo. And so there would be a question at times put to the viewer, and also either directly or subtly that they don't realize that's happening. And it's to bring them into the work, either tangentially or directly. And then also, just as in this, when we installed those plates first, my gallerist Isabel Balzer, one of the plates smashed, and with the uranium in it. And so I was like, I have to clear the gallery, and they cleaned it up, and they weren't too bothered by it, but I was pretty bothered by it.
Well, there are a couple of things I think when you're talking about there. I mean, first of all, in Rotterdam, the family who wanted to bring in their plates to get them tested, but also this thing you remarked upon about how the government in the 1950s were like, no, don't use your uranium for these plates. We need it.
Yeah.
So this kind of strange conflation of kind of domestic consumerism and kind of geopolitical power.
Yeah. It's okay for your kitchen, but actually we need it for something bigger, which is pretty horrific.
I just want to say a big thanks for the talk today and for preparing the presentation as well. I think it was really insightful into what you do, and thanks for taking the questions today. And as you mentioned, yes, your work will be featured in our upcoming exhibition, Home, Being and Belonging Contemporary Ireland, which will hopefully be opening soon. So certainly I welcome everyone when we're allowed to go into these kind of spaces again to come and see this kind of remarkable piece as well. So thanks very much, Brian.
Yeah, well, thanks for the invite, and to Fiona and for everyone to come along. And yeah, thanks.